The law offices of Morrison and Klein occupied the 23rd floor of a building on Wilshire Boulevard, with views of Lowe's Angels that looked different at night, darker, lonelier, more honest about what the city actually was when the cameras stopped rolling. At 11:38 p.m. on a Monday in October 1953, Frank Sinatra sat in a leather chair across from a walnut desk, where three lawyers had spread out documents like surgeons preparing for an operation they performed 100 times before. The room smelled like old books and new money, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from arguing about things that should have been simple. Gregory Morrison sat behind the desk, 64 years old, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, the senior partner who'd handled divorces for half of Hollywood and understood that marriage was a contract and divorce was a negotiation, and emotion was just noise that got in the way of settlement. Next to him sat Richard Klein, Morrison's partner, 47 years old, yellow legal pad, fountain pen, a man who took notes in perfect Palmer method cursive and never looked up when he asked questions. Standing by the window was Bernard Roth, Ava Gardner's attorney, 52 years old, three-piece suit. Watch that cost more than most people made in 6 months. A man who specialized in getting maximum settlement for minimum disclosure. Sinatra had been sitting there for 90 minutes, listening to them discuss community property, asset division, spousal support calculations, tax implications, public relations strategy. The marriage had lasted 4 years. The divorce was going to take longer. Morrison cleared his throat, looked at Sinatra over his reading glasses. "Frank, we need to discuss the statement." "What statement?" "The press statement regarding the divorce, specifically regarding the reasons for the dissolution of the marriage. We're getting divorced, that's the reason." "That's not how it works. The press wants details. They want to know who left whom, why it ended, whether there was infidelity, whether there was abuse, whether there was. They want gossip. They want a story. And if we don't give them one, they'll make one up. So we're going to give them a controlled story, one that protects your interests." "My interests are my business." Klein looked up from his legal pad. "Actually, Frank, your interests are community property, and community property includes your earning potential, your image, your marketability, all of which are affected by how this divorce is perceived." Sinatra looked at him. "You're saying my reputation is an asset. I'm saying it's worth more than your house. So yes, we're going to protect it." Morrison pulled out a typed document, slid it across the desk. "This is the statement we've prepared. It explains that the marriage ended due to irreconcilable differences stemming from Miss Gardner's unwillingness to prioritize the marriage over her career, her refusal to start a family, and her increasingly erratic behavior during the filming of Magambo in Africa." Sinatra picked up the document, read the first paragraph, set it back down. No, I'm not signing that. Frank, this statement establishes that the failure of the marriage was primarily Miss Gardner's responsibility, which significantly reduces your spousal support obligation. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. I don't care. You should care. You're not in a financial position to be generous. Roth, Ava's lawyer, spoke from the window. "Mr. Sinatra, I appreciate your reluctance to make negative statements about my client, but you should know that Miss Gardner is prepared to make her own statement, and her version of events is significantly less flattering to you." Sinatra looked at him. "What's her version?" "That you were controlling, jealous, verbally abusive, and that your declining career created insurmountable stress on the marriage, that she supported you emotionally and financially during your difficult period, and that you resented her success. That the marriage ended because you couldn't accept being married to a woman who was more successful than you." "Is that what she's saying?" "That's what she could say, if we don't reach an agreement." Morrison jumped back in. "Which is why we need you to sign this statement, Frank. It's defensive. It establishes your position before she establishes hers. In legal terms, it's called controlling the narrative. In human terms, it's called lying. It's not lying, it's framing. It's blaming Ava for something that was both our faults." Klein set down his pen. "Frank, with all respect, whose fault it was doesn't matter legally. What matters is what can be proven, what can be argued, and what serves your interest. And your interests are served by a statement that minimizes your culpability and maximizes hers. My interests are served by telling the truth. The truth is expensive. Then it's expensive." Morrison stood up. walked around the desk, sat on the edge directly in front of Sinatra. "Frank, I'm going to be very direct with you. You're broke. Columbia dropped you. Your film career is stalling. You haven't had a hit record in 2 years. Your next album may or may not sell. The IRS is investigating your tax returns. You're 3 months behind on the mortgage for a house you can't afford. And now you're getting divorced from one of the most famous actresses in the world, and that divorce is going to cost you. The question is, how much?" If you sign this statement, Ava's team will negotiate lower support payments because you've established grounds for reduced liability. If you don't sign it, they'll paint you as an abusive has-been and demand maximum support. So I'm asking you, as your attorney, which option serves you better? Neither option serves me. One makes me a liar, the other makes me broke. You're already broke. This is about whether you're a broke liar or just broke. Sinatra looked at the statement again, at the carefully worded paragraphs that made Ava sound selfish and him sound reasonable, that turned their marriage into a legal argument where someone had to win and someone had to lose. "This isn't true," Sinatra said quietly. "The marriage didn't end because Ava chose her career over me. It ended because we were two people who loved each other but couldn't live together. Because I was jealous and she was wild. Because I needed stability and she needed freedom. Because we wanted different things at different times and neither of us was willing to compromise. That's the truth. That truth doesn't help us in court. I don't care about court, I care about not lying about Ava." Morrison took off his reading glasses. "Frank, I've been practicing law for 37 years. I've handled 100 divorces. And I can tell you with certainty, nobility is expensive. Integrity is expensive. Truth is expensive. And you can't afford expensive right now. So I'm asking you professionally, as someone who's trying to protect you, to sign this statement. And if I don't, then Ava's team will release their statement first. And by the time you respond, the narrative will be set. You'll spend the next year defending yourself in the press, fighting against stories that may or may not be true, watching your earning potential drop because nobody wants to hire the abusive ex-husband. Is that what you want? I want to not participate in destroying someone I loved." Klein spoke without looking up from his notes. "Mr. Sinatra, love is not a legal concept. Marriage is a contract. Divorce is the dissolution of that contract. Emotion doesn't factor into the calculation. Then you're calculating the wrong things." Roth walked over from the window, stood next to Morrison. "Mr. Sinatra, I'm going to tell you something in confidence. Miss Gardner doesn't want to release a negative statement about you. She asked me to pursue a clean separation with minimal public comment, but my job is to protect her interests. And if you release this statement," he gestured at the document, "then I have no choice but to respond in kind. So you're not just deciding what you say about her. You're deciding what she has to say about you. Then tell her to say nothing, I'll say nothing, we'll both stay quiet. That's not how divorce works in Hollywood. The press will fill the silence with speculation. Rumors, stories from unnamed sources. It's better to control the message. By lying, by managing expectations." Sinatra stood up, walked to the window where Roth had been standing, looked down at Wilshire Boulevard. 11:43 at night, and there were still cars on the road, still people going somewhere, still the city pretending it never slept even though everyone in it was exhausted. He stood there for maybe a minute. Nobody spoke. Morrison and Klein exchanged a look. Roth checked his watch. Finally, Sinatra turned around. "I'm not signing it." Morrison's face went tight. "Frank, please think about this. Think about what you're giving up. Think about what this is going to cost you. I've thought about it, and I'd rather be broke than say things about Ava that aren't true. Even if she says things about you that aren't true, even then." "Why?" Sinatra looked at him. "Because she was my wife. Because I loved her. Because what happened between us was private and complicated and real. And I'm not going to reduce it to a legal strategy." "That's very romantic, Frank, but romance doesn't pay alimony." "Then I'll figure out how to pay alimony without lying." Klein closed his legal pad. "Mr. Sinatra, you're making a significant financial mistake, one that will impact you for years, possibly for the rest of your life. I've made worse mistakes, not financially. Financially isn't the only way to measure a mistake." Morrison walked back behind his desk, sat down heavily. "Frank, I can't advise you to do this. Professionally, ethically, practically, I cannot recommend that you walk away from this protection. But if you're insisting, then we'll proceed without the statement." And when the bills come, and they will come, I need you to remember that this was your choice. I'll remember. Roth gathered his papers. Mr. Sinatra, I'll inform Miss Gardner that you've declined to make a statement. I expect she'll be relieved, but I'm required to tell you that declining to defend yourself does not prevent her team from making claims. You understand that? I understand. And you're comfortable with that risk. I'm comfortable with not being the kind of man who attacks his ex-wife in the press for financial leverage. Roth nodded slowly. Then we have nothing further to discuss tonight. The meeting ended at 11:51 p.m. Sinatra signed papers related to asset division, property transfer, financial disclosure, but he didn't sign the statement, and he didn't authorize any public comment beyond the standard irreconcilable differences language that every divorce used. Morrison walked him to the elevator. Frank, I want you to know something. In 37 years of practice, I've had exactly 3 clients refuse to protect themselves the way you just did. All 3 of them regretted it. What happened to them? 2 went bankrupt within 5 years. The 3rd killed himself. And the ones who signed the statements, how'd they do? Morrison thought about it. Better financially, worse in other ways. What other ways? They had money, but they couldn't look at themselves in the mirror. The elevator arrived. Sinatra stepped in. As the doors started to close, Morrison said, Frank, one more thing. When this is over, when the divorce is final and the settlements are paid and the press moves on, you'll know whether you made the right decision. And I genuinely hope you did. The doors closed. Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner divorced in July 1957, 4 years after that meeting at Morrison and Klein. The settlement cost Sinatra significantly more than it would have if he'd signed the statement. Exact figures were never disclosed, but estimates ranged from $200,000 to $500,000 over time. Neither party made negative public statements. The press speculated wildly, published rumors, quoted unnamed sources, invented affairs and abuse and drama that may or may not have been real. But the official record stayed clean. Just 2 people who'd loved each other and couldn't make it work. Ava Gardner lived another 33 years. She gave exactly 1 interview about Sinatra in 1986, 3 years before she died. The interviewer asked if she regretted the marriage. I regret that it ended, she said. I don't regret that it happened. Frank was the love of my life. Even when we were destroying each other, even when we were impossible, he was it. And I never said anything bad about him publicly because he never said anything bad about me. And that was a gift. In a town where everyone sells everyone else, where every marriage becomes a legal war and every divorce becomes a press campaign, Frank refused to sell me. He refused to make me the villain in his story. And I never forgot that. I never stopped loving him for that. Frank Sinatra never publicly discussed the divorce beyond standard statements. He never explained why he refused to sign Morrison's document, never defended his decision, never mentioned the financial cost. When reporters asked about Ava and they asked for 40 years, he'd give them the same 5 words. She was my first wife. Nothing more, no elaboration, no stories, no regrets aired for public consumption. Just those 5 words and a look that said the conversation was over. Gregory Morrison retired in 1971, sold his practice, moved to San Diego. Before he left, he had lunch with Richard Klein, his partner for 28 years. Klein asked him, in all the cases we handled, which client do you remember most? Morrison didn't hesitate. Sinatra, October 1953, refused to sign the statement about Ava Gardner. Why him? Because he was the only client who understood that some things are worth more than money, worth more than reputation, worth more than winning. What things? Dignity, truth, the ability to live with your choices. Did he make the right choice? Morrison thought about it. He made the only choice he could live with, and in the end, that's all any of us can do. The law offices of Morrison and Klein closed in 1987, converted to tech company space, then to apartments. The 23rd floor still has those windows, still has that view of Lowe's Angels at night. But nobody sits there at 11:38 p.m. arguing about whether truth is worth more than money. Nobody refuses to sign documents that would save them hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody chooses dignity over defense anymore. Except that's not quite true. Because somewhere, right now, someone is being asked to say something they know is false. to protect themselves, to win an argument, to save money, to control a narrative. And most of them will say it because it's easier, because it's smarter, because their lawyers advise it. But some of them won't. Some of them will refuse. Some of them will choose the expensive truth over the cheap lie. And when they do, they're making the same choice Frank Sinatra made in a law office on Wilshire Boulevard in 1953, when three lawyers told him to attack his ex-wife for financial protection, and he said no without explaining why, without justifying it, without asking for approval. Just no. Because some things you don't sell, some people you don't betray, some truths you don't trade for settlements. And if that costs you everything, then at least you know what your everything was worth. Would you have signed the statement? Would you have protected yourself financially by making your ex-spouse the villain in a story lawyers wrote for a press that didn't care about truth? Or would you have walked out of that office at 11:51 p.m. knowing you just made a decision that would cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of financial struggle, knowing three lawyers thought you were a fool, knowing the smart move was to sign, and the noble move might destroy you?